Hi everyone, we're going to talk today about sources of history and how we analyze them. I came across this really great presentation by Miss F that I wanted to share with everyone to help discern the difference between primary and secondary sources and how we can utilize them in our history classes. So the stuff history is made of, primary sources versus secondary sources. So primary sources tell a firsthand experience, whereas the secondary sources are retold. Now, a secondary source might utilize primary sources to help retell something that may have happened in history, but it's not firsthand knowledge per se or experience with it. So primary sources are those original documents or records that are able to record events of the past. This could include letters to songs, photographs, maps. Whereas our secondary sources are the accounts of the past of events that were created sometime after those events happened. So this might be secondhand information, whether it means going through a number of primary sources to come up with a retelling of an event that took place. Our most commonly used secondary source is definitely the textbook. Documentaries are super important, as well as articles. And encyclopedias as well are great sources, are great secondary sources. So if we were to make an analogy, think of it like this. If you were going to make applesauce, think of primary sources as the apples. So that those are our raw ingredients. And then you'll think of the secondary sources as the actual applesauce, so the things that you make out of the primary sources and apples. Really great analogy and way to differentiate between primary and secondary sources. So what is the difference between a primary and secondary source? So a primary source is the original document from the period, whereas a secondary source comes after the fact. This is super important. We have to be aware of bias. Bias is a tendency to believe that some people's ideas are better than others and usually results in treating people unfairly. It also could result in retelling a story differently based on the bias. So an example, this is a really funny example, as a Lakers fan who lived in Los Angeles, but I also grew up in lived in Massachusetts when I was younger. So this is funny, but if you're a huge Lakers fan, you probably wouldn't be a fair referee because you would not call their foul. So if you were this kid, if you had issues with Boston, because there's a huge Boston Lakers rivalry, there has been for decades at this point. If you have a dislike for one team or the other and you are a referee, you would definitely probably be called biased and would probably be unable to fairly officiate the game. So some rules to live by when you're analyzing sources. So every piece of evidence and every source must be read and viewed skeptically and critically. And this is super important for what we're going to be doing in the next couple of lessons as we start to dig deeper into some sources about the Byzantine and Islamic Empire. So remember, we got to view them skeptically and critically. Evidence should not be taken at face value, so it's really important that we consider the author's point of view. Again, this is a great lead into what we're going to be doing in our next lesson as we start to kind of dig into a letter we're going to review. And it's always important that each piece of evidence be cross-checked and compared with related sources. We tend to call this corroboration in social studies. So we want to be able to corroborate the source. We want to be able to find additional sources that can say the same or very similar account to what took place. So this is just a great way of analyzing primary sources, just kind of an acronym to remember, APARTS. So APARTS is the author, so who created the source, what do you know about the author, what is the author's point of view. So for example, in this really funny one, we've got who created the source is Taylor Swift. If you didn't notice, this is from the video Shake It Off. And it's clearly being written from her point of view, this song is. So we're going to just keep going. We're going to go through this part quickly. Place and time. So where and when was the source produced, and how might that affect the meaning of the source? So thinking about context, putting it into time periods that would make sense. So this was written in 2014, so this is more recent pop culture. This isn't going to be a song that was probably going to be written in 1914, so context, so place and time are super important. Prior knowledge, so beyond information about the author and the context of the creation, what do we know that would help us further understand the primary source? This will be really big as you guys continue on in your social studies experiences as students, and you go into more rigorous instruction and really begin to dive into primary sources and start to answer really tough questions, especially through the use of document-based questioning. So it's really important that you utilize your prior knowledge to help better understand the primary source. So this just gives some information about the fact that Taylor Swift is known in the media as having been someone who dated a lot of people, because that's one of the lines within the song "Shake It Off," etc. So next is audience. So for whom was the source created, and how might this affect the reliability of the source? So, in the case of "Shake It Off," it was definitely meant for general consumption. It's a pop, it's a pop song. It's a catchy pop song at that. So that was definitely the intended audience of this particular source. But it's really important to think about, when we're talking about historical documents, to think about the audience that the source was intended for, because that could definitely affect the reliability of the source. Reason. So why was the source produced, and how does this affect the reliability? Was it propaganda? Was it in an effort to encourage, people to join a cause? What was the reason for the source? The main idea. So what is the point of the source? What is it trying to convey? So in the song, she's obviously trying to say that she's going to shake off all the negativity and she's going to just continue to be herself. But for us and our history, education, what is the main idea of the source? And you're going to get to some of that when we start to break down documents. And finally, the significance. So why is the source important? So ask yourself, so what, in relation to the question that's being asked. So you understand how this plays a bigger role in your understanding of an event that may have taken place in history, or, content in the context of the source. So you can do this on your own as some great practice. So breaking apart the "I have a dream" speech, doing the parts, so using this acronym and mnemonic device. This is really a mnemonic device. So if you want to slow down the video and go through piece by piece, this is a great bit of practice. So this is just breaking down that if you had gone through the process of breaking down his speech, it's also important to note that while Martin Luther King Jr. is noted as a great civil rights icon and leader, he, of course, just like the rest of us, would be guilty of bias because, he has a perspective that, is completely based on his experiences, which influence his bias, just like everyone else's. So his bias in this case was that he wanted equal rights for all people, regardless of race. So we don't tend to think of that as negative. Whereas a lot of times when you think of the term bias, you might think of it more negatively. But it's important to note that we all have bias, and it's definitely influenced by our perspectives and our experiences. And that was it. So if you could actually take a look at some of the practice that is available, this will really help with your understanding of primary versus secondary. Thank you for watching.